Precisa ferir a pressão, medir a glicemia ou tomar uma vacina? Na Raia tem exames, testes e calendário vacinal completo. E o que é melhor, tem sempre uma Raia aí perto de você. É fácil, prático e rápido. Dá para ir entre uma música e outra. Procure nossos farmacêuticos. Quanto mais você conhece o que a gente faz na Raia, mais você se cuida.
The more I grow and the older I get, and just kind of more experience I gain, like you better make sure your players feel comfortable with what you're doing. Don't try to put a square peg into a round hole.
In this episode of the Coaching Coordinator Podcast, Blake Harrell, the defensive coordinator and inside linebackers coach at East Carolina, discusses the evolution of a team's identity during the early stages of the season. Coach Harrell highlights the importance of flexibility and adjusting strategies to align with the team's strengths and weaknesses. He shares insights on East Carolina's transition to a three-down defense in 2021, emphasizing the need to tailor game plans to player skills. The conversation covers leveraging analytics, player feedback, and building depth in the team. Coach Harrell also touches on practice strategies to enhance communication and preparedness, stressing the significance of player rotations and building confidence for adapting to challenges throughout the season. Stay tuned for our Winning Edge takeaways following the episode. On today's episode of Coaching Coordinator Podcast in our season series, we're focused on finding our true identity, and joining me to discuss those ideas, the defensive coordinator, inside linebackers coach at East Carolina, Blake Harrell. Coach, great to have you here on the podcast.
Appreciate it, Keith. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your clinic talk at Lawrence First and Goal. We aired part of that, a segment from that, to promote Lawrence First and Goal, and that was on winning the money down. And we'll talk a little bit about some of that idea. You guys were one of the best on defense on third down in 2021 around the time that you gave that presentation. But digging into today's topic, when we look at the early season, we always go in and we think we know the identity, but that's something that evolves over the course of spring ball camp, scrimmages, and then getting into those first few weeks of the season until you really know who you are and what you can do.
That's exactly right. I think a lot of times we have a good feel for who we think we want to be and who we are and what our strengths are, what our weaknesses might be. And we always say each team has its own identity. And then you get into the season, you're going through fall camp, you play pretty well, you've got your install in, and then you get into the season, well, you may have to make an audible and kind of adjust a little bit. So I think that's part of the unique thing we get to do as coaches.
And that's something I think you mentioned to me before we got going, just thinking of something that Paul Johnson said some time back.
Yeah, I heard Paul Johnson say, it's been years ago, probably 10 years ago, that you don't really find that true identity of your football team until about 3 or 4 games in. Coming out of the camp or out of spring ball, you might find hey, these are going to be our 12 or 15 or 18 guys we can rely on game day. Here's going to kind of be what our strength is, playing a little bit more man or playing a little bit more 4 down or vice versa. And then you get into game 1, 2, and 3, and hey, maybe 3 down should have worked better for you, or maybe a guy that you thought could be a pass rusher is not showing up like he did against your offensive tackle. You got to kind of adjust some things there. So I just thought that was really good advice that he gave, and for him it was maybe his quarterback couldn't run the midline as well as he could the veer, or vice versa, and he had to kind of adjust. And one thing we talked about off the air there was just in 2021, we went into that season kind of hell-bent on being a 4-down team, and our first 4 games, I think we were at 2-2 after those first 4 games, lost a close one to South Carolina, come from behind to beat Marshall and led by an FCS team, and just weren't clicking defensively. Well, game 5, we had a tough Tulane opponent at home, a returning veteran quarterback who's now in the NFL, and we played more 3-down that game and just kind of clicked for us, and all of a sudden it looked like it brought new life to our players and energy and kind of fit them a little better, and that's who we became the next 7 games, and really just kind of changed the season around for us and changed really kind of the start of what we do defensively here and the success we've had here at East Carolina defensively, being top 40 in the nation last year in scoring and total defense, and I think top 10 in 3 and outs and those type of things. So just don't be afraid. I guess my biggest advice from that, and just like Paul Johnson said, don't be afraid to kind of pivot or change or audible what you think you were or what you may have installed during fall camp to what best fits you. Maybe you get into the season and all of a sudden backside RTOs aren't showing up and it's more huddles and shifts and motions and trades, and you got to find ways to keep it simple for your players, and that way they can go play fast and can execute on the field, because it don't matter how well our game plan is if we can't adjust and change that game plan once we get into it.
So a couple important things I think come up there in looking at that, especially as we're going through and evaluating our defense early season, seeing what they do best. A couple things go into it, as well as thinking about what the opponent's doing. As you said, you may have planned for some things, and that's just not what you're seeing week in and week out. When you're looking at these early season evaluations of where you guys are at, how much of this is based on some of the analytics and data that your guys put together for you, and game film, watching game film in the look and feel just from the feedback you get from players?
Yeah, I think it's all the above. I think the last point you made is the feedback you get from players. I used to take that for very little accountability, but I think the more I grow and the older I get and just kind of more experience I gain, like, you better make sure your players feel comfortable with what you're doing. Don't try to put a square peg into a round hole. If your outside backer is more of a drop guy, plays in space, let him play in space. Don't try to put him on the line of scrimmage in a 7 technique. And if your corner is better at playing off man than he is press man, well, let's play off man. Let's just build some things around it to test some change ups, obviously, but let's kind of go from there. So, yeah, we do some analytic studies and kind of go through there and, hey, what's been successful in college football. But also, like you said, like, some of it's based on your opponents early in the season. I think we play Liberty early this year. We play App State early this year. They both love to run the football. And then once we get into our conference play, we're going to see a North Texas, a UTSA that kind of spread you out, go tempo, throw the ball around. So our plan of attack can't be the same plan of attack that we have for App State and Liberty going into those. So some of it is you're going to shift and pivot throughout the season based upon your opponent. But I think going into those first couple of games, you got to really assess and evaluate who you are. You've also got the old saying, too, the most improvement is after your first game or after your first loss. Well, unfortunately, for most of us, that happens early in the season. We have a first game and sometimes a first loss early in the season. So you got to really study those games, evaluate yourself, and quickly put yourself in the best position to go improve, play better, and give yourself a chance to win football games.
When you look at having to make that pivot, and ideally, I mean, it's something maybe that you're evolving to as you start to see it, but sometimes it's, like you said, that 2021 season being a 4-down quarters team and then coming out against Tulane and going to 3-down and playing a lot of max drop. That's a significant pivot. So how do you make that transition, whether it is something slow and kind of evolving along the way or something like, hey, we got to make a change right now? How do you make it in a way that it's not setting you back to square one, that your guys are building on what they've done already?
No, I think there's got to be carryover, because you can't just scratch it and say, hey, no, we're going a totally different direction. I think that could put yourself way back and in a place you don't want to be, and possibly be looking for a new job as well. But I think one thing we do in our preseason camp, whether it be spring or during fall camp, is we go install our whole package. So if we need to, hey, we want to get away and play more post coverage, or we want to play more deny coverage, or we want to pressure more, we got that in our toolbox that we can always fall back to. Maybe it wasn't your plan to be a 3-down post coverage team, but that's kind of what our players evolved to. And really the big thing it did for us back in 21, Keith, was we quit giving up explosive plays. We went from giving up 7 or 8 a game to only 3 or 4 a game. Well, that was huge in giving us a chance to win. Maybe we gave up the same amount of yards, or maybe we were still giving up 20, 22 points a game, but just the explosive plays and holding teams to field goals made a big difference. So I think you just got to look at unique ways that's in your package or in your toolbox that your players can still adjust to and still feel comfortable with, but still give you a chance to maybe big plays are showing up in the early in the season. How can we eliminate those? Maybe it is tackling. Maybe it is doing a better job in pursuit. Well, we got to go back on the fundamentals. Or maybe it's, hey, I got to help out a certain corner. Well, how can we help him out and keep the ball in front of us type mentality from a play caller or a coordinator standpoint. So you have to assess and evaluate all those things. Sometimes it's just a simple fundamentals that you got to go back and rework and refocus on. It seems like every year after game one, game two, we're going back and working tackling circuit again, or we're going back and continue to work a blitz circuit or a turnover circuit or wherever fundamentals that we may struggle with early in the season, just to kind of refocus on those things. And I think also early in the season, after game one, game two, you have those kids' attention to, hey, really focus on those and really draw attention to it. So you can do that. It pays benefit.
We look at some of the things that force us to pivot. For example, we might have that lockdown corner who we don't worry, about giving a ton of help to because we know he's good on his own. Something happens, he's down, he's out. That next guy up might need help. It might force us to change a little bit of what we're doing. When you look at developing that next man up and maybe even knowing and saying, okay, we're going to look at some contingencies here. We're not necessarily going to chase ghosts, but if this were to happen, here's how we pivot. How much of that do you look at as you're going through the course of the season?
Absolutely, Keith. I mean, in the perfect world, none of us have to pivot. We can just keep on plugging and playing and keep on rolling and do what we do, right? But very, very few of us are in that situation to be Georgia or those type of guys and have those guys that can step right in or be able to run our same system and throughout. So you got to be creative. And I think one of the things we do in practice is what we call two-spot. Obviously, we got basically two different practices going on at times. So we're always developing not just our twos, but our threes and fours. I think so often in practice, you can rep in the ones, you're repping the twos, a little bit of the threes. Well, your third team or fourth team guy never really get a lot of reps in practice, and you lose their attention pretty quick, and they're not developing. They're just kind of sitting there until they're a third-year player, and it's their time. And you always want to kind of be building that depth in case you said, like you have a guy go down, and now all of a sudden they were a fourth-team linebacker. Well, now they're a third-team guy, and they're traveling. Well, somebody else needs a blow during the game. Well, hey, they could be up. So you got to have plans for that and be developing that depth. I think just our guys do a really good job. Our older players do a really good job of bringing those younger players around. And I think anytime, especially during preseason camp, you can steal reps from an older guy and stick those young guys into. It's been valuable, especially early in the season, too. If you get a game where you can stick some of those young guys in the game, I think that's valuable. But knock on wood, you mentioned the situation about a corner going down. I think we got some really good corners right now, and I think we got a kid that's projected pretty high in the draft. He can lock some guys down, but I think at the same time, we got to give him, we call it a smoke break over there, where we're not asking him just to play man all day by himself, and we can squat him, let him play the flats, and give him a little bit of a breather and catch his breath. But also at the same time, we can't go ask him to go play 80 reps every week, 75 reps every week. How long of a season is he going to have? I mean, is he going to look up in game 7 or 8 and he's banged up and we don't get into game 12, 13, 14, which could be the most important games of our season? So what's our plan to make sure we add that depth? So one thing we've done defensively, we've always played 20, 22, 23 guys and just being that, hey, we're going to be in the game in the fourth quarter. Let's have fresh guys in the fourth quarter. So we've built some depth at every position. And the other thing I tell our coaches is like, hey, if so-and-so's in the game, let me know. And we maybe play more cover 2 than we will quarters and ask him to play press man or press quarters. Or maybe we'll play it safe here. And then the other thing we talk about as a coaching staff, and this is just something we've been developing recently, is where to play those guys at. If he's a second-team guy, when's the best situation? We won't have a whole 11 guys in there that are twos, but we can rotate those guys in. And we talked about, like, hey, if we got the offense backed up and they're coming out inside the 10, inside the 15-yard line, let's have our guys out there. Same if ball crosses the 30, 35-yard line going in to score, let's have our main dudes out there that can go play. Maybe that is our top 15, 16 guys, or maybe it's only our top 12 or 13 that we fully trust. So I think there is field zones that you can substitute and rotate guys in to help build your depth as well.
Yeah, I know looking at this on the other side of the ball as an offensive coordinator, and you mentioned, like, this guy's going to be in the game, right? So
right.
I think of, you have playmakers on defense too. I could think of a particular slot that's coming to mind for me that if he wasn't in the game, there's some things that we're not going to call, right? And I mean, the last thing you want to do is call something for that player. You look up and he's not in there. But a lot of that really was over the course of the week. And then we had a specific Usually on a Friday before our walkthrough, we'd have a specific meeting on our plan of play and rotations and all those kinds of things. I mean, for example, that slot receiver for me, we knew he was going to about 50 to 55 reps. We felt like after that, he's not as good for us, but we didn't want to burn all those reps early in the game either. We wanted him in the fourth quarter, so we had to plan. How do you guys approach that? How do you approach your plan of play and rotation and getting certain guys in and even somebody for those key players?
Yeah, like you said, like you got to have some conversations throughout the week just about, hey, if our second team Mike's in, here's kind of what I'm looking at doing play call wise. Here's where he's going to be in the game. He's a really good blitzer, so you may see us popping gaps, doing a little bit more different things with him. And we talk about that at every position. And then we'll talk about, like, hey, our second team Mike might be in, but let's leave our first team Will in. That way those two guys are playing together. Hey, you might have your number 2 safety in, but let's leave our boundary safety starter in. That way those two guys can play together. So we try to make it, like, once that second series rolls in the game for us, we're starting to roll guys already and get those guys ready. And especially on, like, a first and second down, like we would say, hey, if we can go first and second down, we may package it up to third down. So I think that helps a little bit defensively, just get some different bodies on the field. But we'll also say, hey, if they pick up a first down or 2 first downs, let's get our guys back out there and make sure we got the guys that we want on the field to get a stop with out there. So those are some conversations we got going throughout the day. Our D-line coach does a really good job with his substitutions, just kind of, if we get a hurry offense or a tempo team offense, we tend to sub just to kind of slow it down. And that kind of gives everybody a chance to kind of make some rotations there as well. So we'll do it by series or within a series. Begin the second quarter, begin the fourth quarter. We rotate some guys. Just later in the half, we have some fresh bodies out there and some guys that are ready to roll.
You mentioned 2 spotting in practice. How much do you look at making sure that you guys are starting to mix and match so that somebody who may end up out on the field, let's say with the first team who's not normally with them, works into that flow of the communication and working with other guys?
Right.
How do you do that in practice?
Yeah, it's tough. Like, we get in bad habits as coaches, just, hey, the ones play with the ones, the twos play with the twos, and so on and so forth. So the ones are always feeling comfortable because they always play with ones. And the twos, sometimes they're getting frustrated because the guy beside them, maybe they're ready to go play with the ones. They're just not quite as good as the guy in front of them, but the twos don't look as good because maybe there's a couple guys that really should be threes or something. So one thing we do is we do rotate it by days. It may not be within a day. We rotate as much, but, hey, we go out the third day to camp. We'll move some guys around. Some of that is just for competition and to push guys and get them moving a little bit and motivate a little bit. But some of it is for just what you said, just for the communication. Hey, I played with him in practice, so I know who that is. Or I had an OTA the other day, for example, and I put our starting Mike with the twos, and I asked the wheel backer, I said, hey, how was it playing with the starting Mike? He goes, Coach, that was really easy. Like, he's such a good communicator. He made my job easy. I actually had my best day of the summer just because he was out there. So I think it helps building confidence in some of your other guys as well. So I think it's important to do. And as coaches, we can't get in those bad habits. We got to continue to rotate those guys around throughout practice, whether it be preseason camp or in game week. I think that's probably one place I haven't done a good job personally, just during game week. Because you want your reps to be, our twos get the same look as our ones from the scout team. So I want to make sure they don't get the same looks doubled up. So we will say, hey, instead of taking a whole 5 or 6 play rack, hey, let's rotate every 3 or 4 snaps. That way you don't get the same looks, but you are rotating with some different guys in there in different scenarios. So we do have that possibility. But exactly what you said, you got to make sure that every guy feels comfortable with it. The guys are going to be out there and riding with on game day.
Coach, I really appreciate you taking some time, giving us insight into finding your true identity and how those things continue to evolve over the course of the season. Some great ideas on practice, game reps, all those kinds of things. And best of luck, Coach, to you and the Pirates here in 2024.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me on again.
Here are Winning Edge takeaways and ideas for implementation. 1. Adapt and evolve based on early season performance. Flexibility is key. Recognize that the identity you establish during spring ball and fall camp may need to change once the season begins. Be prepared to pivot and adjust your strategies based on actual game performance and what suits your players best. Use early season evaluations to find out what's working and what isn't. This period is crucial for understanding your team's strengths and weaknesses in real game scenarios. Incorporate that feedback from these evaluations to refine your game plan. 2. Develop depth and rotate players strategically. Consistently develop your second and third string players during practices. Implement practices like two-spot drills to give all players meaningful reps, which helps in building depth and preparing backups to step up when needed. Use strategic rotation plans as well to keep your players fresh throughout the game and the season. Rotate players based on the situation, such as subbing in fresh players during critical moments or when the offense makes substitutions. And 3, emphasize fundamentals and situational adjustments. Always make fundamentals a priority. Regularly revisit and emphasize fundamental skills like tackling, pursuit, and turnovers. Early in the season, focus on these basics to ensure your players are technically sound, which forms the foundation of a strong defense. And be prepared to adjust your defensive scheme based on the opponent and specific game situations. Be sure to check out our partner, Vertical Raise. Elevate your program's online fundraising to new heights. Use Vertical Raise's online fundraising system and raise more money in less time. Click the link in the show notes to get in touch with your Vertical Raise fundraising coach. Be sure to check out all of our partners in our 10% toolkit. The link is in the show notes.